this folder, inside the
Yes.
solutions folder?
Yeah.
This is the first time we created something in, right?
No, it's the second. There's a first assessment that was due, which is the first app.
That was submissions.
Yeah, we put those in submission.
Oh yeah, submissions. Sorry.
Okay. So it should be
Sorry.
week 4 in submissions then.
It should just say assessment 2, like assessment 1 and assessment 2. The assessments are numbered by weeks before. That is wrong. That's bad. Because like the whole philosophy is that we readjust the pace according to the class, so it doesn't make sense to number them by week. Yeah. So assessments submissions is where you should put yours. Assessment solutions is where Angel and I are going to post the correct answers. Apologize.
We just put them there even before the name.
Assessment 1, assessment 2, assessment 3, assessment
Now,
4.
what we should do by this weekend, what number would that be?
2.
2. Okay.
I think. There's the exercise. And then assessment 1 is vanity app. Assessment 2 is this. And then assessment 3 is relevant. So we're going to give you the tools to do assessment 3 today. So let's see if I can reboot my brain here. Okay, so today is going to be about data structures. So it doesn't really do us any good to only have data types that represent atomic things, like a single element, a single number, or a single object, or something like that. Part of the power of computing is the ability to manipulate large amounts of data in a patterned way. So making statements like, I have 1,000 things, do this one thing to all 1,000 things, and to be able to do that with a tiny bit of code instead of 1,000 lines of code. Seem reasonable? So what we're going to talk about today are 2 ways of organizing data that Swift and many other languages give us. How to manipulate those structures, and then if we have enough time, which hopefully we will, use those data structures to power a table view. So remember, we talked about table views in the first and second class, and we were able to manually make one, put cells in the table views by just dropping in labels. Today we're actually, if we get there, going to power them with code that enables us to create essentially unlimited lists of stuff. So today, create, modify, and iterate over arrays. We'll discuss what arrays are here in a minute. Identify methods and properties of that data structure. And then talk about another data structure called a dictionary, and to be able to create, modify, and iterate over those, and call its methods and properties. And then give you enough knowledge to know the difference between them, and then deploy them in a table view. So we're actually going to give an app the ability to hold user data. Before we get there, I want to review IB applets and IB actuals, and teach you how to dismiss that stubborn mobile view that you used in the first assignment. And so it's just a little bit of code, but now you actually know enough to do it, and it should make sense. So, if you want, you can create a new project and follow along, because this is a neat little handy reference for you for dismissing the videos, and you should be able to follow along. And so I'm going to move quickly through this since it's a review, and stop me if something totally doesn't make sense, or if I go a little too fast. So that says show mode. Like this. And then I'm going to go up here and add another view controller. And connect that with a segue, like this. So I control click or right click, and then, or two finger click, however you have it set up. Mouse over here, from under triggered segues, action, and then this little pop-up that says mobile. Click on it. So now we have a mobile segue. And as we all know very well, if we were to tap on this button, this view controller would slide into view and never go on. So that's it. So what we want to do now is add a button into the modal view here that just says dismiss. Or cancel, or whatever you want to say. We don't have a navigation controller here, so we're not going to have the bar on the top, the navigation bar on the top and the left. There are a couple of different ways to present this action, but we're just going to use a button right now to dismiss it. So now we're going to go over here to view controller, and let's duplicate this guy. View controller.swift under file. This isn't the only way to do this, it's just a really kind of convenient way to cheat our way to a view controller. So I'm going to name it dismiss view controller, or modal view controller. And I'm going to open it up, and in there I'm going to change the class name to modal view controller.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Why do we not create a new one from, why we generate this like that, as a copy, as a new,
Because it just has, it
as
has a vendor code in there already. We could go to file, create new, like my company had to do that too.
So it's a shortcut.
This is just a shortcut
Okay.
to doing it, yeah.
There's no other reason, just.
Yeah.
Alright.
Could you just do the last step again?
Which last step?
The duplicate.
Okay.
Sorry, it's just like one step behind you.
It's okay. We can try it the other way too. We can say new file. This might be more intuitive for you if you don't like the duplication. So let's try it this way instead. So new file. So this is actually going to be a common way to create templated chunks of code for ourselves. Just like there are templates for projects, there are also templates for individual classes that we can use to embed in our apps. So in this case, you can see a ton of different types of resources here that we can do, like Apple Watch storyboard, that like GeoJSON files if you're into geotagged data, core data for persistent storage on the iPhone, user interface classes, and then other source files. So if you go to user interface, do view. No, that's not what we want. I don't know if this is going to give us everything that we want. Okay, so source Cocoa Touch class. So this will let us extend whatever UI kit gives us. So hit next here. Under the class name, you should say mobile view controller, and then subclass of UI view controller. But under that list, you can see it has a ton of different classes that we can extend. not the test folder, but the other. Say create. So that generates a file for us like this. Okay. Now do you all have a mobile view controller ready to go? Yep. Okay. So under main storyboard, change the type of this view controller, the class rather, to modal view controller here. Under which one is this on? The identity inspector. It should say modal view controller names. Make sure you have the second one selected. Okay, so once you have that done,
Let me go back. Classes.
sorry, it's under identity inspector, which is the third one over,
You may
and
have
then
changed
class.
your class title within there.
The name of the class has to be mobile view controller, so yeah, you should have a file, view controller, and where's mine? Great. It's up here. Seriously? Alright, if you had that happen. Try this again. Okay. So you should have a file that has called modal view controller.swift that has a modal view controller that extends UI controller. So now, if you go to this inspect, if you go to the assistant editor, you're going to want main.storyboard on one side. You're going to want modal view controller on the other side. So if you haven't figured out how to navigate this thing yet, it's a bit obtuse, but it's an interactive breadcrumb up here at the top. So the way that you can break out of it if it's showing you something weird on one of these panels is to click on one of the crumbs in the breadcrumb and then try to navigate your way to what you want. So manual is probably the section you want to go into, because then that will go to the top level of the project, and then you can sort of traverse clumsily the folder tree until you get to the exact file that you want. There's this. Okay, so what we want to do is create an ID action for our dismiss button. If you remember how to do that, you can control click on it and then drag over from touch up inside over into the class like this until it says insert action. You should see a blue line. Like I'm just going to ask you a name. So I'm going to say on dismiss tapped. It's a good idea to name these. I didn't go over this convention before, I forgot. But it's always good to name these consistently, usually with on, the word on in front of it. So it's like, so you can distinguish from code. So this is actually an event, like on dismiss tapped, on button tapped, on whatever. And then that should create a stub for a function for you like this. We're just going to add one line to this function that dismisses the modal. It's this one. you do self dot and then start typing dis, it should focus you in on one of these methods. You should see one that says dismiss from controller animated. This is the one that we want. And it takes two arguments. One is a flag as to whether it's supposed to dismiss that modal in an animated fashion or not, whether it slides back down or whether it just disappears. And the other is an argument that, or a parameter rather, that accepts a function. We haven't talked about this yet. That you can actually use a function as a value in a parameter string for another function. But we'll be getting to that today. You see it's optional. So what this is a function that this method will call when the app has successfully dismissed the modal. So when it's done, like what do I do after it's done? It's the question that it's answering. So we're not going to worry about this right now. It's optional, so we have the option of putting nil in, which tells it there's nothing to do after you're done. So hit enter, and that'll put you into this editing mode. Then type true, and then tab, and then nil. So you should end up with something like this. And that's it. Oh, fail. There.
Mine worked.
Sorry, did yours work? Good. At least someone's was working. I'm going to try to find which selector that was. Unknown class, mobile view controller. Great.
That's exactly what happened.
Just now?
Yeah.
Alright. So, let me try to fix that. Is yours working again?
Yeah. When I exit out, it worked.
Exit and put it back.
Yeah.
So what I think is happening is there's some process that's introspecting the code, meaning there's another program that's sitting there watching the names of the classes that you're making. There's a bug somewhere where when it writes the interface file, like the storyboard file, when it tries to describe that linkage, gets confused for some reason. So if you clean the build, exit out of Xcode, come back into Xcode, and then build again, and it'll rewrite everything. So if any of you encounter that problem, where it's like, I don't know what you're talking about, that might fix it.
Have you seen when your files, like your code files, it's like a dark gray color on the left hand? That's what was happening. That's what it looked like. And then when I came back in, it was a regular color.
Really? No, I haven't seen that. If it happens again, let's take a look. But anyway, so this is the way the modal dismissing should work. Does everybody have this working? Except Raj, you came a little late. Sorry. So what's the issue? No? You have it working?
When I click it, it doesn't go down.
It doesn't go down. Does it say any of it?
It runs.
It runs, but it just doesn't go away.
It doesn't.
When you go into this view here and you mouse over this little dot, does it highlight your button?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have this piece of code in here. Dismiss view controller enemy. True. Completion nil.
My dot is just a circle that's not filled in. What does that mean?
Okay, so you have to do this. Drag from the circle over to the button.
Okay.
And then try it.
I'm going to drag my button to where it says UI, but not any object, center any object.
Yeah, that's okay.
Mine just doesn't hook on.
Any object. We haven't talked about any object yet. Any object is a generic object. It says you can give me any object type you want. So while we usually want this to say the type of the thing we're attached to, any object will work fine. It just changes the code that we have to write on the inside of the function. So what's happening when
It's just like not hooking on. Like I drag it over and nothing happens.
the dot doesn't fill in?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Not weird.
We're angelless today, so okay. So this you have to set the type. It's sort of set to view controller. So it thinks that this is this. There you go.
I had it on mobile view controller.
It probably thought that it was a different name.
That's strange.
Yeah, it's strange.
Okay. Hopefully it
Then you
works.
have this. Ta-da! Got it.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then right click on that. And then just right click. So we can
Alright. So one skill that you're going to have for later today is the ability for this view controller to refer to this view controller. So what we're going to do, hopefully by the end of class, is we're going to create an app that lets you keep a catalog of dogs. Naturally, because that's the theme of the course. And so the problem is that if you were to have a form in this view controller that has data in it, like the name of a dog, its age, gender, its breed, and all that stuff, you want to be able to write that somewhere where this guy can be aware of it if he has the list of dogs. So what's going to happen is we're going to attempt to create a label over here that is changed by a form that's over here. Tricky, huh? So this should review how to use ID outlets to refer to objects in the interface builder in the storyboard. So this is tricky. So what I need are a text field and a label. So I'm going to put the label in the view controller over here. referencing outlet. I'm going to drag that up here, and then give it a name, which is, like we said before, I think it was just my text field. Say connect. So now, I'm going to reference the label in the view controller. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to change the file that I have loaded over here by interacting with this breadcrumb. And then click on view controller and do the same exact thing. And create a new referencing outlet here. By saying, and then saying my label. Okay, so all we need now is a way for the modal view controller to refer to the view controller that it came from. So the view controller that it came from, in Segway parlance, is the presenting view controller. Does that make sense? So, in order to do that, I'm going to go back to the editing modal view controller over here. And in this function, on dismiss tapped, I'm going to grab the value out of the text view and write it into the label. Let's see if I can do this. So let go. Maybe it's better if I do this. Maybe not. It's pretty huge. So let's see, new label text, self dot my text field dot text. Then I'm going to grab a reference to the label. So this is a little tricky. So the reason why it's tricky is because of the types that we have working against us. So everything in Swift is typed. And the thing is that we're given a very generic method in UI view controller to refer to the presenting view controller. It actually doesn't know that the name of my class is view controller. It thinks that the name of the class is UI view controller. It thinks we're getting a generic view controller. Let me show you what I mean. So this property, presenting view controller, is of type optional UI view controller. But the type of my view controller, the one that actually has my label reference, is called view controller. Does that make sense? They have very similar names, so it's a little confusing. UI view controller is what UI kit gives me. That's Apple's class that I'm extending. And view controller is my actual class that I have. So the way that we deal with this little problem is to perform an operation that we call casting. So we're very confident at this point that the presenting view controller is actually a view controller. It's the only other type that we have to work with. So I can use this keyword as to tell Swift to treat whatever this thing is as my class view controller. I think it might complain because I think in the new version of Swift you're not allowed to, you can't use a naked as on an optional. So we'll see. And then the way that you can test to see if this is at least, partially correct is by looking to see if it auto-completes to something that you've written. So in this case, my label, which is ID output that I created in the view controller definition. So now I have a reference to a UI label, and I'm going to say label.text equals new label text. Build that. I think I'm going to get a couple of errors. Yes. So now I have to, just does what I thought it was going to do. It'll either do it or it'll crash. So. Yes. Okay.
Did we click dismiss to execute? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, click to dismiss. Of course, it's a terrible user experience, but it works.
What was the explanation?
Right on the ads.
Right on the ads. Yeah, sorry. Right here. Okay, so this line right here is a little bit crazy. But you're going to see stuff like this a lot. In fact, a better way to write this might be like this. So that we're using variables to our advantage. So each line is supposed to do one thing, so this is better practice. So line 15, all it does is grab the text out of the text label. Line 16 refers to the view controller that we came from with the proper type. Line 17 actually grabs a reference to the label, the ID outlet that we had created before. And line 18 sets the text in that label to the text that we grabbed out of the text view. Okay. So I can save this as an example into the class folder so you can see how it works. So, but the thing to take away from this is how to create those references, how to create the action from the button, and the fact that we now have a little line of code, this one, that can help us dismiss a modal if we need to.
Is that always the syntax, the true completion? No.
Sometimes you'll be putting the function here, but the syntax is essentially the same. The values might be different. Okay. So put that away for a moment, and then I'll post this to GitHub soon. I can post it now if you want. Do you want to see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So under lessons, lesson 8, paste that in. Show you a little Git magic if you want to see it. slideshow is on GitHub, so I won't go through every slide. You can use it later as a review. We'll only use it as a syntax reference, but I think it's becoming far more effective for you to actually learn about these things by typing the code instead of reading the slides on the screen. But I'm going to go over generically what data structures are and what data are, at least in the minds of computer scientists, and then jump into arrays. So a data structure is a type that manages potentially large amounts of data. What are data? If you have a notion in your minds of what a fundamental definition of data might be. I'm going to give you the Will Martin version of it here in a second. So, data are pieces of information devoid of meaning. So, for example, these numbers, what do they mean?
Nothing.
Right, nothing. We don't know what they are. Right? They have no context, they have no units, they have nothing that indicates anything that we could infer from here. And so thus they're useless. That's generally what data are. So when we talk about big data, when we hear about data coming in, data by itself has no use whatsoever, even though MBAs and executives and business types think it does. It actually doesn't by itself. It has to be interpreted in some way for it to be meaningful for us. But when I tell you that these are actually record high temperatures for New York City in May collected in Central Park, now it has meaning. Now it actually means something. We can draw conclusions from it. We can compare it to today's high and say, oh, did we break the record or not? We can reason about that. So they're instantly promoted information. So when we talk about data and data structures, that all we're talking about are really raw mechanisms to push data around and manage it. But we have to apply meaning to it in order to operate on that data in meaningful ways. So the rawest data structure that we have is called an array. An array is a type. It's a type that behaves a little bit differently from classes, and we're going to go over this detail later. But you'll see the effects of what it means by passing an array by value here in a minute. What it means is if you take an array and assign it to a new variable, that creates a brand new independent array. So you kind of have to be careful. An array is a one-dimensional list of things. So just like the list of the temperatures here before, we could represent this as an array. It's just atomic units of data that are arrayed in a linear fashion. And so Swift gives us mechanisms to traverse that data in a linear fashion. You can add data to it, remove it from it if it's not constant, and then just like everything else in Swift, we have to give an array a type. So we generally can never talk about a generic array. We can only talk about an array of strings, an array of ints, an array of doubles, an array of dogs, an array of some other type, an array of arrays even. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe we'll get into this, but can you have multiple values with it, or multiple types within an array?
You can. You have multiple types in it, but then the type of the array is an array of any object, which is this mysterious type that we haven't talked about yet, but we'll talk about it a little bit today. So just to get your mind around the semantics of arrays, they contain objects that we call elements. So they can be empty. Even if they're empty, they have to have a type. Each element has an index associated with it, which is a whole number starting with 0 that refers to a single element in the array. We can say that an array has a count of elements, so we can ask the array, how many elements do you have inside of you? Arrays are ordered data structures, so I can actually talk about the first element of an array, the last element of an array, and I'm guaranteed that those actually never change, well, the last one changes, but the first element of an array, for example, if all I'm doing is adding elements to the end of the array, the first element will never change. So
will be empty, does that mean that they contain nil, or is that truly just like empty brackets?
That's actually a really great question. In Swift, it means that it is, yeah, just empty brackets. There's 0 elements.
Okay.
And when you say index is not a 0, it means the first is the 0.
It's a 0. That's right. So the first one is 0. So there's actually a theory that one guy had, one of these guys that like computes massive arithmetic calculations in his head. I saw it on a talk show once. I think it was over. But his theory was that if we actually taught kids when they're very young to start counting at 0, that mental math would be much, much easier. That the techniques that we would teach kids for counting and for doing arithmetic would be significant, like just different enough that it would make it easier for us all to do math in our heads, which is kind of an interesting theory. But some modern languages are still indexed at 1, like Lua, which blows my mind. Like, why would you ever want to do that? Like, once you start to get used to it, everything starts to make a little bit more sense. Like, why they do that. But in binary, we start counting at 0, so the first index is already 0.
What about size? Are they, do you have to predefine how big an array is, or is it dynamic?
No, it's dynamic. Yeah, which is one of the lovely things about Swift. It's like typed and dynamic, which is kind of amazing. So for the rest of you, there's some programming languages where when you create an array, you actually have to tell it a priori how many things you want to put in. In Swift, you don't have to do that, which is super cool for us because it makes things a lot easier. We talk about this notion of iterating over an array. So actually, arrays and loops kind of live together. Like both concepts go hand in hand. So we can use loops to apply operations to whole chunks of data by iterating over elements of an array. So all the counting work that you've done with loops so far is super relevant for dealing with arrays from going beginning to end. We have macro operations that we can do to arrays, like take them and sort them, filter them, or reverse them entirely. And then we can change on a micro level individual elements by changing an element, adding an element to randomly inside of an array, removing a single one, etc. and so on. So we're going to get into the syntax, but we're going to get into the syntax by actually using arrays. So you should create a new playground for yourself in Xcode. Call it, data structures or something like that. So we're going to make some arrays. I do not know why that keeps popping up on this. Okay, so I'm going to show you some of the different syntaxes that you're going to need to know in order to deal with arrays. First is just going to be how to create an array. And there's several ways to